welcome to another Digital Photo Mentor tutorial. In this video, I'm going to walk you through how to do a really simple raw processing for your images using Luminar by Skylum. Let's get started. Okay, so this is the opening screen that you see when you first launch Luminar. I'm going to open an image. And I've already done some work on one from a raw file. So I'm going to open the Luminar file, which is the type of extension you'll get when you save in Luminar if you want to keep all your history and your layers and all your work. I'll explain a little bit about that once we get into the image. So if you're opening and working with a raw file, do note that it does take a moment to open, a little bit longer than if you're working with JPEGs. Make sure that you have a good processor, that you're working with your computers strong enough and fast enough to handle working with raw files. Okay, so once the image is opened, you'll see it actually apply a preset that I've done. I quickly created 4 looks for this image. So I did the raw processing and then I created 4 different looks quickly with some presets, and I'll show you how to do that. So the first one is this one called the wet plate, and that's a preset with a texture overlay. There's another one that has black and white. The vintage look, which is kind of a faded out, high contrast greeny look, and then just the color image as I processed it in the develop module. So I'll show you the before and after. You can do before and after in Luminar with this eyeball. Hold it down at the top here. So click and hold it down and to see the before and after. You can click this here, which brings up a little slider, and then you can do your before and after this way. Click it again to turn it off, or you can just hold down the backslash key on your keyboard and that will give you the eyeball as well. So that's what the image looked like out of camera. That's what it looked like when I finished just processing the raw file in Luminar. So if that's all you want to do, I'm going to show you a really simple way to do that. Okay, so something that I really like about Luminar is that it saves all of the things that you do to your image, the history. There's a little clock icon up at the top here. If you click it, that is your history. So you can scroll back and undo to any degree that you want to undo all the way back to the beginning. So I'm going to go all the way back to the beginning and undo just as if I'd opened this raw file for the first time and show you how I achieved those 4 different looks. Okay, so now we're back to the original image. So the first thing I want to show you is how to get started and what some of the things do. The buttons at the top here turn things on and off on your screen. The one that I just clicked with a little, looks like a line with 3 little squares underneath it, turns off the preset panel at the bottom. So if you're not using presets, you can just turn that off. The next one turns off the side panel, so you can see your image larger. Okay? But if you're working with the filters, you're going to need that side panel on. Okay. This one turns on and off the histogram. Again, very useful to leave the histogram on. This one turns on and off the layers, and I'll show you more about layers when we get to that. So the first thing that I'm going to recommend that you do is select what's called a workspace. You do that right here from this pull-down menu. Essentially what a workspace is Luminar has pre-selected a certain set of filters to apply for you to get that particular look, or Quick and Awesome, for example, only has 2 filters versus Professional that has a lot more. So if you want to make your life really simple, just choose the Quick and Awesome one. For purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to choose the one called Essentials. You can also make and save your own, which I've done here in this one called Grunge. Okay, so I'm going to choose Essentials. And once it's been applied, you'll see the filters in this same spot. Okay, so those are the filters. Notice there's no changes to the image because I have to go through and make the decisions of how I want to edit the image now. So it's applied, or it's selected for me, the raw develop filter, the accent AI, which is artificial intelligence filter, which is pretty cool, saturation and vibrance, polarizing filter, structure, curves, and vignette. As I said, the one called Quick and Awesome is much simpler. It only has 3 filters. I thought it had 2. So if you only want to do those, choose Quick and Awesome. But we want Essentials because we want this raw develop. Okay. Now, if you've opened a JPEG, it actually won't say raw here. It'll just say develop. So in order to get true raw processing, you need to open a raw file and you need to apply this raw develop filter first. Okay. If you're used to using things like Lightroom or Photoshop, you may have seen a lot of these sliders before. I'll just zoom in so you can see better. So you have the standard temperature, tint, exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites and blacks, and clarity. Okay, that is the same thing as you'll see inside the Lightroom basic panel in the develop module. So they work in the same way, just as you would expect. Okay, so you can start by applying a white balance. Maybe I want it a little bit warmer. That's maybe too warm. Let's go back to daylight. So just play around until you get a color balance that you like. Let's go a little bit warmer. Okay. And you can always do your backslash key, remember, so your before and after. So just warmed it up a little. Something I recommend when doing any raw processing, and I recommended this in my Lightroom workflow as well, is to always start with the white and the black sliders. I know a lot of instructors and teachers do those last or they don't even touch them. I like to do those first, and I set what's called my endpoints. Okay, there's a handy little trick that works in Luminar, the same as Lightroom. If you hold your Alt or Option key down while you're clicking the slider, everything disappears, or what it looks like disappears. But when you slide that white slider to the right, you see what's happening in the bottom right corner? I'm starting to get what's called clipping. Okay, now I've obviously taken this too far, but if I take my finger off the keyboard now, you'll see what that has applied on the image. So it's brightened up a lot of the tones, but now I have pure white in my image. So what I recommend with the white slider is take it to the right until you see some clipping like this appearing, and then just pull it back until it's all gone. So we don't want any white clipping, but we want white touching the edge. So what that's doing is it's adjusting the histogram, pulling it to the right so that it's just touching the edge but not clipping, right? Then I want to do the same with the blacks. And of course, at any point, it's all up to your discretion, your artistic discretion. Okay, so if you want it more light and airy, clip some. If you want it a little bit moodier, make it a little darker. Okay, so now I've done a similar with the blacks. On the blacks, I generally want to go till I clip and then come back to leave a little bit of blacks clipping. I like a little bit of blacks clipping because it gives you a richer, deeper, more contrasty image. Okay, the next thing I want to do is add a little bit of clarity. Raw files are not sharpened and color adjusted or contrast adjusted in the camera. Okay, only when you shoot a JPEG does that happen. So you always need to add a little bit of sharpness. I like to add maybe 15 to 20 clarity. Keep it on the low side, especially if you're dealing with a person in a portrait. You don't want to go too far with the clarity. Okay, so overall, all I've done is adjusted the temperature, whites, blacks, and clarities sliders, and let's look at the before and after. Okay, looking pretty good, right? Okay, so that's about as far as I want to go with the raw filter, but you do have the option of doing things like correcting chromatic aberration, removing distortion if you have a wide angle lens that distorts the edges, and correcting perspective and so on. Okay, so if any of those things, your image needs any of those things, that's where you're going to do it in these panels here. Okay, so I've set my panels up in Lightroom so that when I open the next one, right now the raw develop filter is open. You do that with the little triangles. I've set mine up so that when I open the next one, it closes. Okay, so I've set mine up so that you can only see one at a time, and then you don't end up scrolling through a bunch of filters on the side. How you do that is up here under filters menu, just choose single view mode. Okay, if I turn that off, you'll see that if I open that one, the accent filter stays opened. Okay, so I'm going to go single view mode, and we're going to go to the next one and literally just work my way down the filters. Okay, the accent AI filter is kind of neat because if you have an image that has some areas that are too bright, some areas that are too dark, which is often HDR material, this filter will help you bring back a lot of detail in both areas. So I'm going to take it to the extreme, which is something that I recommend that you do as well. Take the sliders all the way to one end and then come back just to see what they do. You can't hurt anything. Okay, so that's a little bit too extreme. I'm going to pull it back because I like what it's doing in the log or the tree on the left. It's bringing out the detail in the tree. So let's kind of go somewhere around there. Okay. I still want the leaf to be my focus. Now, saturation and vibrance, I don't think I'm going to touch for right now. I'm going to do the others and come back to them. I very rarely add any saturation and vibrance. And if you do the black point and the white point, as I have suggested and demonstrated, you will get automatically more color saturation. Let's look at the before and after again. So you look how dull and sort of drab looking it is. And now look how punchy it is. Even the color is brighter. Okay, and that is the black point and the white point will give you that. Okay? And the more you increase contrast, the more color saturation you get as well. Okay? So be careful on the saturation because it's really easy to go too far. That's obviously too far. Okay? Even on the vibrance, it's easy to go too far. Okay? And you can reset any of these sliders just by double clicking on the words like I just did. Okay? Polarizing filter, I don't think it's going to do a whole lot to this image, if anything at all. It's designed to darken skies and remove reflections just like you would if you had a polarizing filter on. So it's not really doing anything, so I'm just going to ignore it. Okay. Now you'll notice that something's happening here. You'll see that raw develop and accent are in orange and the other two are not. That means that I've actually made some changes here. These ones are showing inactive. Right? So if I don't want to use any of these filters, I can just right click on it and delete and it goes away. Okay. Structure is the next one. So structure is kind of neat because it gives a lot, it's like clarity, but on steroids. Okay, so it's going to enhance every tiny little edge. Okay, and there's something that's really neat in Luminar that you can apply these only in certain areas. So unlike Lightroom, where if you applied clarity globally, you can't really remove it from certain areas unless you apply it with an adjustment brush or something like that. Okay, Luminar has tools built in to allow you to apply them only to certain areas. So let's say we really like what that's doing to the leaf or to the tree, but not to the background. We can actually just paint that in, okay? And I might just add a little bit of softness. Okay, so now I've decided I want to apply that to the tree and to the leaf, but not to the rest of the image. Okay, so click this little brush up here next to the eyeball. So make sure you're under the filter that you want to mask. It's called a mask. So the brush is right here. And I'm going to choose, you have three options of how, actually three options of how you want to apply this filter. So I'm going to use the brush and I'm going to literally paint it in. Okay, so now up here I have a choice of paint or erase. Okay, pretty straightforward. I'm going to paint. And I'm going to change the opacity to about 50% or so that I'm only painting gradually. Okay, this is the size of my brush, this circle here. And I'm just, the first time you click, you'll notice that it's applying the filter to the whole image right now. So the first click you make, it will apply it only in that spot and remove it everywhere else because I'm painting the filter into the image. Okay, so notice I clicked and now it's gone everywhere except where I'd made that one click. So now I'm just going to do a couple of quick brush strokes over the leaf where I want that applied. Remember, I'm painting at 50%, so it's going on gradually. And I kind of just want this strip of the wood that's in sharp focus a little bit enhanced. So it's not applying onto the green background. It's not applying over here to the blurry tree, only the parts that I wanted. And you'll see that there's actually a little mask being applied there. So let's see the before and after by turning off just this filter of what that filter is doing. Okay, so it's giving the veins in the leaf are really standing out. Okay, when you're done painting, click done and let's go to the next filter. Okay, curves is one that I don't use a whole lot. Again, I've already done my contrast up in the raw part, so I'm going to leave that one, and you can as well. You can choose to delete it. Let's say we don't like that one. We're just going to get rid of it. Okay, and then the last one in this set is vignette. So vignette is something that you can use to darken or lighten the edges of your image. And it has a really nice feature in Luminar. I'm going to turn it all the way dark and feather to 0, minus 100 actually. So to show you a couple of things. So I do this to get the placement and the shape of my vignette where I want it. So roundness, I'm going to make it a little bit rounder and I'm going to make it a little bit smaller so that it kind of makes the shape of the leaf. Okay, now this is where the cool part comes in Luminar. Okay, Lightroom does not have this. If you want to put a vignette off center, you have to do a radial filter in Lightroom. But Luminar allows you to place the center. Okay, so I'm going to click that, and I know that this is about the center of the image right here in this leaf, but I'm going to want it a little bit this way and a little bit up. So I'm going to take a guess and see where it goes. Okay, so that's not too bad. That's going to maybe do some nice things. Okay, so I'm going to just turn the filter back to something normal, double clicked it, and let's see what it's doing. So that's the before, and that's the after. Okay. Now, same thing applies here as what I did with the structure, where I just painted it onto the leaf. So the tree's gone really dark now. If you like that, you can leave it. If not, you can apply another type of mask. This time I'm going to do a gradial mask, and I'm going to apply it from this edge forward. Okay, let's do it the other way around. There we go. Okay, so now what's happening is everything on the right hand side is going to have the filter applied, and it's not going to hit the tree so much. So I've just kind of kept it off this part of the tree. And you can see again, there is a mask there. So wherever you see white, that filter is going to apply. Wherever you see black, it's not going to apply. Right? So there's our vignette. Really brings your eye in to the leaf. Okay, focusing on the leaf. And that's about it. Okay, so if you're happy with your image, you can save it and export. When you do a save, if you've done any layers and special stuff, if you've opened from a raw file using the standalone Luminar, you're going to save it as a Luminar file. Okay, so there's your extension. Okay, you want to save the history, and I want to save the original source. Okay, so I'm going to save that as a Luminar file in my working folder. Okay. Now, I remember I promised to show you some steps above and beyond. So if you just want to process your raw file, honestly, use the Essentials workspace, follow through those filters, delete the ones you don't want to use, and you're done. Okay. Saving a workspace. Okay, so let's say we want to save this workspace because I like what's doing here, and the ones I deleted, I know I'm not going to use. So I'm going to save this as a new workspace called Raw Workflow. And now that's going to show up from my pull down menu in the workspaces. Okay. So now it'll be easy to get to next time. Now, when I want to do additional filters, I don't want to mess with these. I want to make sure that they stay with how they are. So I'm going to go into and add what's called a layer. Okay. Layers are confusing for a lot of people. Think of it this way. If you have a painting, and you put a piece of tissue paper up in front of your eyes, you can't see the painting or the photograph that's behind the tissue paper. But if you cut a hole in it, now you can. Okay, so the tissue paper is a layer that's between your eyes and the picture that you're looking at. Layers inside of Luminar work the same way. So you're adding basically a transparent layer on top of your image, and we're going to apply some things to that layer. Okay. And the neat part about making it separate is you can dial it down, you can mask it, you can change the blend mode, you can do all kinds of fancy stuff. We're going to just keep it fairly simple in this tutorial. Okay? I'll get into some fancier stuff in a future tutorial. So I've clicked on this little plus button here to add a layer, and it just added one called Layer 1. So you can rename your layer just by right-clicking and choosing Rename. And I'm going to call it Radiance and HSL, right? You just type right in. Okay, so I'm going to apply some filters. So you want to click Add Filters. Now, there's a whole bunch of filters, and it can get really overwhelming as to which one to pick. You'll notice that some are orange and have a star beside them. Those are my favorites, okay? You can filter this list of filters. You can filter the list of filters to just your favorites and make it a lot simpler. So if you know these are the ones that you use time and time again, save them as a favorite, and then they're easier to find and get to. So I'm going to add Image Radiance because I like that one a lot. And I'm going to add HSL because it allows me to play with the colors in the image, and I'll show you how that works. Okay? If you want to add another image to your favorites, like the develop one here, just click the star next to it. Okay? Same with presets. Okay, so now I'm going to add image radiance. Again, add a whole bunch, see what it does, and then scale it back. So it's your image. You get to decide how much you want. What this radiance filter does is it gives the lighter areas in your image kind of a glowy, ethereal look to them. And I really like it for this image for the background. So I'm going to bring that quite high. And I may mask it again so that the leaf stays sharp and the background is more blurry. Right. And I'm going to bring the warmth up just a tiny little bit. And the saturation down a tiny little bit. So again, just play with this. You can't hurt anything. And if you're happy with it, move on to the next one. Okay, HSL stands for hue, saturation, and luminance. So there's one tab for each of those things that you're going to affect in your image. In this case, I want to affect luminance. Okay, I want to dial that green and yellow background down a little bit darker. So I know that it's got green in it. I'm going to pull to the left, so it's going to darken anything that's green. And the same thing with yellow. Now look at how extreme that goes. There's actually a lot more yellow than there is green. So I'm going to keep it subtle. And let's make our leaf a little brighter. Okay, so now we can do a couple of things. We can preview just what that filter is doing by turning it off and on with the eyeball. We can preview what this layer is doing by turning the eyeball off and on. Or you can go back to your before and after with your backslash key or the buttons at the top. Okay, so it's looking pretty good, right? So this is what this layer has done. I've just added the radiance and the saturation layer, and it looks pretty good. So if I want to take some of this radiance off the leaf, I'm going to brush again, but this time I'm going to use erase. How I decide whether I use paint or erase is which is the thing I need to do more of, okay? In this case, I would have to paint more because I want more of the image to have the filter than where I want to erase. Okay, so it's easier for me to erase the small bit as to paint the whole background. So I'm just going to click again. Make sure I'm on erase. I'm still on 50%. And I'm getting some of that sharpness back in those leaves. Check that out. Let's just do one pass on the tree. Okay, before and after. Now you can see that its filter is really only applying to the background. Okay, so look number one is the finished process raw file. So now we're happy with it. You can save and export your image. That is easily done using this export here, save to image, or you can save it to any of your favorite social media sharing sites or directly email it to somebody. Okay? I've already done that, so we're going to go on to the next step, which is adding some of our presets and effects. So once you get your image where you're happy with how it looks, what we're going to do is we're going to turn on the presets at the bottom. And we're going to click this little button down here that's right at the top of the presets, okay, called Overlay Preset. Okay? And what that's going to do is it's going to create another layer automatically for you. And we're going to find the one that I want to apply. So the first one I'm going to apply is called Wet Plate number 2. And that's the one with the texture screen. And you can see what it's done here. I'm going to rename it so I know. I've done this before where I've forgotten which preset I applied and then I wanted to find it again. And so it's a good idea to rename your layers so you know what you've done. So I'm not going to do too much here because I really like the whole effect. I'm happy with that the way it is. So that was look number 2. If you want to dial it back a little bit, Luminar has a couple ways to do that. You can dial back the whole filter or the whole preset. So it dials everything back. And you notice I'm doing that on the preset. And it also is working here as well. Or you can go through each one and do the eyeball test. Turn it off and on. See if you like what it's doing. Okay. Texture overlay is definitely cool. Grain is cool. Now you'll notice that this one has 2 vignettes. Okay, so this one is obviously vignetting one area and this one is vignetting a different area. Okay, so you can put more than one vignette on your images. So I'm pretty happy with that. We're going to go and make another one. So I'm going to turn the eyeball off And I'm going to do overlay preset again. So to make things simple, I've added the ones that I wanted to use into my favorites. And you do that the exact same way as I added the filters. Just click on the little star. So the next one we're going to apply is this vintage look. Okay, so what it's doing is it's obviously desaturating and putting a contrast, and it looks like a lot of texture in the image as well. Okay, so I'm going to rename the layer vintage look. Okay, and then let's just see what each of these things are doing. So this is your opportunity when you go through each filter to say, okay, do I like what it's doing? Is it too strong? Maybe you want to dial just that filter back, or you're happy with the whole thing exactly the way it is. Oh, see, I actually like that better without that vignette on. Definitely I like the grain, and the cross processing is kind of cool. So this vignette I wasn't super happy about. I think I'll just dial it back a little bit. There we go. Okay, so then we got look number 3. So we got the original, wet plate, and vintage look. One more to go. Turn off the eyeball, overlay preset, and the last one that I chose for this image is called strong black and white landscape, and strong it is. Okay, so this is really contrasty. So if I want to make it less contrasty, let's see where that's coming from. Okay, so definitely dramatic. Let's dial that back a little bit. And just tweak. Just tweak until you're happy with it. You know, is that doing anything? Yes. Is that doing anything? It's darkening the top. It's alright. Definitely the curves is adding a lot of contrast. So let's go with it as is. You can also choose to dial the filters back. But remember, because it's got the black and white conversion layer, that's one in here, it's going to give you sort of a faded look, right? The more you dial it down. Let's remember to rename the layer. Strong black and white landscape. Okay. So that is essentially really quick processing. Let's just go back to our color image. Okay. So this is what came out. This is what came out of camera. This is what I got after doing just the raw processing, and then 3 different looks really quickly just by adding a layer and a preset to each one. So now I can save this file and it will keep all the layers. Okay. I'm going to do that. Actually, I'm just going to hit save. So I just hit Command or Control S on a keyboard, just like you would in many other programs to save. So it's going to save that Luminar file for me. And now if I want to save out each particular look, I just have to do an export for each one. So I just need to turn that layer on and save out that particular image. Right? So I hope that you found this helpful. I highly recommend that if you're working with raw files, give the workflow a try. Save your own workflow with the filters that you want to apply and keep it really simple. You know, maybe just put in 2 or 3 and get that raw develop filter and go from there. Then you can decide how far you want to take your images, or if you just want to make them look sharper and a little bit punchier. So until next time, keep practicing, keep playing, and remember to always have fun with your photography. Take care.